Show me a good loser in professional sports, and I'll show you an idiot. I've never played professional sports, but Leo Durocher's quote was accurate far beyond the professional sports arena. Show me a good loser, and I'll show you an idiot. I'm the idiot Mr. Durocher, the Major League Baseball Hall of Famer, was talking about. At that moment, this idiot was sitting in the living room of a stranger's apartment, seconds before I saw my wife walk into the house with her ex, and, apparently again, current lover, for what she was probably expecting as a night of passionate sex. I was here to shatter that expectation and perhaps regain my sense of self-worth. My name is Tal Rivers, the guy who ruined a seemingly great 20-year marriage by giving his wife what he thought was a wonderful 20th wedding anniversary gift. I paid for her tuition for a master's degree in philosophy. Yes, I know. Master of Philosophy. Right. We've been talking about this since our only daughter Lydia went off to college 3 years ago to get her veterinary science degree. I was so looking forward to the freedom of being an empty nester parent for the first time in 18 years, but my wife seemed to have other concerns. While I imagined a life full of travel and more spontaneous sex, she feared it was the beginning of old age. Her solution was to take a year off from work and return to school for higher education. Truth be told, I wasn't crazy about the idea for a long time until we talked about it over and over, but she insisted, and like a loving husband, I finally gave in. I decided this would be a great gift for our 20th wedding anniversary, and I was right. She cried and hugged me tightly when I told her this. That night, she almost killed me in bed. She was practically jubilant the first few weeks, telling me everything that happened during her days at our local small college. I heard about her professors, her classmates, her classes, and even what she ate for lunch. Gradually, however, these daily reports over dinner were greatly reduced, and after about 2 months, I was practically forced to coax information from her lips, like an interrogator with a suspect. Overall, our communication has become sparse, so different from what it was throughout our marriage. I wasn't born yesterday, and I knew something was wrong. I spent several days banging my head against the walls, trying to figure out what to do. Well, I knew what to do, but it took me a few days to wrap my head around the fact that I needed to hire a private investigator to check on my wife. Being the CFO of a large business gave me access to a variety of professionals, and within 2 weeks of hiring a PI, I realized that I also needed to hire a family law attorney to handle my divorce. Tracy had sex with a guy named Ambrose, who was taking several of her classes. He and Tracy did it a few times in his off-campus apartment, which was bad enough. But they also did it in our bed a few times. To say I was devastated would be the understatement of the year. I had no idea until she suddenly started being quiet. We were still making love 3 to 4 times a week. She was still my best friend. And I was willing to bet that at the farm, we would be there for a long time. Now, I couldn't imagine us living another year. I know they give out little gold statues for outstanding acting in movies, but I think I'll earn one for my real-life acting next week. I controlled my anger and even managed to have sex with Tracy twice without her suspecting that anything was wrong. Part of this was obviously because she was oblivious to my feelings. We were just cleaning up the kitchen after dinner when the doorbell rang. Tracy looked my way as I didn't move to respond, sighed in annoyance, and walked towards the door. I heard a conversation between the process server and her. Most of all, I heard her sigh heavily when she realized that the curtain had been pulled back on her game of infidelity. I had more than enough time to pour each of us a glass of wine and place them on the kitchen table before Tracy staggered into the room with the ever-present manila envelope. She sat down in her place at the table without even looking directly at my face. "How long have you known?" she whispered before taking a sip of wine. If she had looked up, she would have seen me staring daggers at her. "How could you?" I whispered back. We sat in silence for 20 seconds. 30 seconds. She raised her eyes, but immediately lowered them when she noticed that I was looking at them intently. "What the hell, Tracy? It's time for you to stop pretending to be dumb," I growled. Finally, she looked at me and I realized she was trying to find out how much I knew. "We've been flirting for weeks. I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Flirt? Is this what you mean? You were with him for at least 2 months? I shouted. Tracy jumped back in her chair as if I had pushed her. Now she understood better how much I knew. She began to shake slightly in her seat. I have videos and photos, I growled. How many more were there, traitor? I've never yelled at my wife before. Her eyes were huge discs of fear. Her mouth moved, but there was no sound. I swear, he was the only one, and it was a mistake. Mistake, Tal, she screamed. It got out of control, but it was just... Don't say that, Trace. Don't you dare. It was obviously good sex because you kept coming back for more. She blushed deeply and lowered her eyes again. She took a sip of wine, then looked straight at me. Should we get a divorce? Tracy asked quietly. I don't want a divorce. Yes, it was incredibly stupid, but it was... She quickly fell silent before she said the magic phrase. Unshed tears filled her eyes. I was torn between anger and sadness. Did you notice you didn't apologize for cheating? You said you were sorry you hurt me, but you don't regret what you did, do you? You also didn't tell me why, Tracy. What did I do to deserve it? She blushed deeply, stuttered, then stopped. She repeated the process twice more before finally finding the words. It was exciting for me when someone started flirting with me. Someone else flirted with me, told me I was beautiful. It made me feel sexy. You understand what I mean? No, Tracy, I don't understand. I answered softly. I've been telling you that you're beautiful for over 20 years. I've always told you that I think you're beautiful. It seems like my opinion doesn't matter. The only thing that matters to you is what someone else thinks of you. Work was my salvation for the next 2 weeks. After work, I spent most of my time at my favorite bar, usually getting into the house just in time to go to bed. Despite Tracy's protests, I spent my nights in the guest room. I had absolutely no desire to sleep with her. Tracy was fighting a divorce, and her lawyer convinced the judge that we should go to counseling. I was extremely dissatisfied, to put it mildly. As I explained to the counselor in my first session, cheating was the mountain I was willing to die on. Tracy knew this and agreed, as long as at least she didn't go overboard. Yes, I know I screwed up. We always said cheating was a reason to break up, she lamented. I didn't do it on purpose. Please, I love you. I don't want a divorce. You broke my heart, Tracy. Hell, you ripped it out of my body. I don't see how I could ever trust you again. I was disappointed when our daughter, Lydia, sided with her mother. I know you're hurt, Dad. So am I. But you've been together forever, and you know you still love her. What would you do without her? You'd be miserable. Lydia always spoke straight, and I respected her opinions. Well, at least most of them. You really have no idea how much she hurt me, Leeds. Remember how upset you were when Robbie Ray broke up with you to date Katie Gibson? Well, multiply that by at least 100. Will that help you? If I screamed and cried and threw things like you, would it be easier to understand if I was more visual? Lydia blushed, and I knew she at least understood my point. But she's a mom. She's not Robbie. You have been married for over 20 years. You must be together. Always. It was one mistake, Dad. One mistake in more than 20 years. It was a terrible mistake, Leeds, and it was more than one mistake. It was a series of mistakes over several months, I said. I expected Tracy's parents to be on the side of reconciliation so they didn't disappoint. However, my parents surprised the hell out of me. I expected them both to be angry with Tracy, but I didn't expect them to try to talk me out of the divorce. I was especially surprised by my father, who always said that he would kill my mother if he ever caught her cheating. I'm not defending what she did, Tal, but you have to ask yourself whether your life would be better with or without her, he said over beer one evening. As time passed, I felt like I was swimming against the flow of the forgive her waters. I was more than annoyed that none of the others could see my point. After all, she had cheated. She was cheating. Still, I had to admit that they were okay. I still loved Tracy, even though I was devastated by what she had done. 3 weeks later, I did something I never thought I would do. I gave in, gave up on the divorce, and took Tracy back. I didn't pretend that everything was suddenly fine, and I made it clear that I didn't trust her as much as possible. However, when I told her about it, she cried like a 5-year-old girl with a ragged knee and hugged me so tightly that I finally had to rip her off like a shirt 2 sizes too small. I went back to our bedroom, but it was over a week before we had sex again, although not for lack of trying. There was clearly no love here, and she was at least aware of this fact. I made sure we took it slow, but after about 6 months I thought we were back in a pretty good place, although I was realistic enough to know we would never get back to where we were before. I was still bothered by the fact that for some reason Tracy didn't feel like I was enough for her. "You must think I'm beautiful. You are my husband," she said during one of our conversations. "I understand the adulation and the excitement. Honestly, I understand. But you broke our vows, Tracy. I violated it. Our oaths. We gave them in front of our families and our friends. You know how seriously I took those vows. How would you feel if I jumped into bed with another woman just because she thought I was handsome?" She looked shocked and tears began to flow from her eyes. You wouldn't do that, would you?" "For revenge," she whined. Tracy made sure we did a lot of things together, as if she was showing me that she was there for me. She still attended classes and would occasionally mention something about it. She didn't mention Ambrose again, and although I assumed they no longer spent time together, I occasionally checked the GPS unit my detective had installed in her car when I first assigned him the case. I never told her about this block and saw no reason to remove it. It was a blip on the radar, so to speak, when it showed up almost 14 months later. Among the places Tracy went during the week was the apartment rented by classmate Judy Strangland. It wouldn't be completely ruled out, but then it appeared once a week for the next 4 weeks, always on different days. Coincidentally, she never mentioned spending time with her classmate, even when I gave her the opportunity. Honestly, I was offended that she thought so poorly of me that she immediately went back to the well, as if it wasn't the first place I looked. Then I realized that this was not about me at all. It's all about Tracy. Perhaps despite Tracy's initial protests when I caught her the first time, it was much more than just sex. It only took my detective 1 month to obtain numerous confirmations of Tracy's duplicity. In the middle of the day, he and Ambrose met at a friend's apartment. I sat quietly in a beanbag chair at the far end of the living room. Tracy practically stormed into the apartment, giggling, with Ambrose hot on her heels, his right hand on Tracy's ass. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't even notice me. They walked into the bedroom giggling, but since they thought they were alone, they never bothered to close the door. I simply sat down in my seat, giving the two lovers a chance to begin. "Don't bother going home. You had my only second chance. You bastard, stay out of my reach. By the way, she's yours. As part of the deal, you will get good relatives." I intended to leave by the time she got home, but on the way home I had another thought. This was also my home, and I was not going to give it to her just like that. I sent a message with a very graphic photo of Tracy and Ambrose to my daughter, my parents, her parents, my lawyer, and her lawyer. I didn't include a message. There was no need for this. "Oh, Daddy, did you have to send that letter to your grandparents too?" My daughter whined to me on the phone. "Wasn't that a little overkill?" "I don't think it was too much considering you were all hoping for me to make up with her. Anyway, you are one of those who pushed me to reconcile with her. I just hope you didn't know she was going to continue this crap." She faltered for a moment before finding her voice and loudly denied the latter. "Sorry, Daddy. I didn't know," she cried. I stopped 1 foot from the entrance to the bar and quickly looked around. As usual for a Thursday night, the Unicorn was not crowded. That's one of the reasons I almost always went there on Thursdays. I didn't want or need a crowd. I haven't wanted or needed this for a couple of years. Ever since my divorce from Tracy was finalized, I walked to the far end of the bar and sat down in what I thought was my seat. Not even 30 seconds later, my favorite bartender psychologist placed a double shot of Eagle Rare bourbon on the rocks in front of me. She stared into my eyes for about 5 seconds. "Hard week, Tal?" Do you want to talk about it? She asked. I gave the young redhead a wry grin and gave her a quick look up and down, which I knew didn't escape her. The big-breasted woman's red hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, and her tight t-shirt was tucked into tight Levi jeans. Over the past year, I have become a regular visitor, and Molly Riley has become something of a confessor. She could understand me better than anyone since Tracy and I broke up. There are days, Molly, when I wonder if I made the right choice. I mean, I know it was the only real choice, but that doesn't mean there aren't days when I don't miss her, or at least the one I knew for the first 20 years or so. Are you sure you wouldn't rather just find a friend with benefits? I could help you find one of them. The other one is much harder to find, Molly said. Don't I know it, Malls? I thought I had it, but I was wrong, I replied. Another customer sat at the bar, about 4 seats down. Molly left to tend to the man's needs. With nothing else to do, I watched Molly interact with a new client. The new client was easy to look at, that's for sure. She was a short woman with shoulder-length blonde hair. Even though she was dressed like a woman in her 50s, I guessed she was about 10 years younger than me. She was wearing mom jeans and a loose-fitting flannel shirt, but as she sat talking to Molly, I got the impression that under the clothes, there was a rather tight body. Who is your friend? I don't remember seeing her here before, I told Molly as she returned to me with another double bourbon. Molly looked at the blonde from me several times, and her face lit up with a smile. I saw something click in her head, so I gave her a minute. Yeah, this could work, she whispered to herself before turning to me. This is Raquel Brignon. She started coming here from time to time over the last few weeks, divorced several years ago due to an abusive husband. She was some kind of nerdy genius in school. She is now a math professor at a local college. Was married for 15 years, finally tired of her husband beating her, Molly said. I'm guessing she's scared of any guy now. She told me she hasn't had a date since she got divorced. You know, maybe the guy she wants is just a few seats away. I could see the gears turning in Molly's head. I started shaking my head. This isn't Sleepless in Seattle or any other chick flick, Malls. This is real life. Real life isn't always pretty, at least not for me in recent years, I said. Yeah, but you're a great guy, Tal. You might be the answer to the question she's afraid to ask, Molly said. We discussed this for a few more minutes. I agreed that Molly could do a performance. After she had prepared a round of drinks for the group at the table, Molly returned and spoke with the woman. They looked at me several times. I felt like I was back in my school days. Molly finally beckoned me with her finger, inviting me to come over. I walked up, feeling as if I was going back to my school days and being asked to go on a date. I watched her deep blue eyes take me up and down as I approached. I laughed inside myself, and I know that on the outside I smiled uncertainty, because her assessment was completely masculine, especially her openness about it. You'll come, she said quietly, making me laugh. Molly made introductions and then went off to mix drinks, I think. I wasn't sure because I regretted how I approached this seemingly ridiculous situation. Seems like being on a blind date, doesn't it? The blonde said, showing me a full set of beautiful white teeth with a megawatt smile that I wasn't expecting. She looked straight into my eyes, and it seemed to me that she was looking for something in my eyes. I know that as a child I would have looked away from such a look, but now I kept my gaze on her. We held this mini stare-off for about 15 seconds. Then, for reasons I still don't understand, I slowly leaned in and kissed her full lips. She didn't back down a millimeter when I leaned in and kissed me back, with the same pressure with which I kissed her. I see that you are a shy and evasive type. This is not how Molly described you to me, she said quietly. I'm actually not sure why I did that, I muttered. This is actually the first time I've done this. She doubted it. I shrugged and raised my eyebrows. Then I leaned it down again and we kiss it again, a little harder this time. Oh, you can get used to it. I knew I needed to say something. She got ahead of me. So Molly tells me you've been married a long time. How are you doing, Free? Looks like you've settled in somehow, she said, making air quotes with her fingers as she said it, then gave me another one of her bright ones. Smiles. Since I got divorced, I've been on about a half dozen dates, 3 of them with the same woman, a coworker. Thinking back 100 years ago, dating seemed fun. It's not so much fun anymore. Well, if we count it as dating, it's number 1 for me since my divorce 6 years ago. If we don't count it, then my losing streak continues, she said. I'm not sure how much Molly told you. Just the basics, I interrupted. But that's enough. Let me state for the record, I have never laid a hand on a woman. Good to know. But just in case, I carry a .22 and know how to use it. Just saying. We stayed at the bar talking for a couple of hours. I learned that Rocky was 42 years old. According to her, she was never that girl, but was usually somewhere around the popular kids in her small school environment. Sort of like a lady at court. She was diligent and organized. According to Rocky, she rarely went on dates in high school. But when she did, it was usually with a friend of one of the guys who was dating one of the hot girls in a popular group. She considered herself a good girl and didn't have sex until she was an 18-year-old high school senior, with her date in the back seat of his car after prom. The excitement of the moment outweighed the lack of physical satisfaction for her, although her date seemed more than pleased with the event. Rocky went to college to study actuarial science, a discipline that evaluates financial risk in the insurance and financial industries using mathematical and statistical methods. She devoted a lot of time to studying, but also had a lot of fun and went on dates. She had sex with about half a dozen students during her studies, but her dates never reached a serious emotional stage. This stage occurred approximately 2 years after its release. She and a coworker at the insurance company where they both worked dated for almost a year before getting married. Her husband was 3 years older, and Rocky was enjoying her first real romance. She also liked the new sexual positions that the much more experienced Arthur Martin brought to the bedroom. The couple seemed very much in love when Rocky became pregnant 5 years after their wedding. However, she suffered a miscarriage 3 months later, and this seemed to cause a change in their relationship, which Rocky wondered about in retrospect. 5 years after this, Rocky is almost certain that her husband was having an affair. She became convinced of this when one evening, returning home early from a meeting that was supposed to last longer, she overheard her husband talking on the phone. The ensuing argument turned physical when Arthur hit Rocky on the cheek, which was the last thing she remembered until she woke up in hospital 2 days later. Despite her husband's loud declarations of love for her, the divorce was filed quickly. Rocky's feelings of inferiority and fear lasted much longer, however, and 6 years later she was an assistant professor of mathematics, practically living the life of a nun. Today gone, gone tomorrow, and gone next week. She raised her eyebrows at me teasingly, then laughed. I smiled back, noticing how pleased she was with her joke. No one ever said that you math geniuses are open mic stars at the comedy club, I said, giving her my most innocent look. Rocky looked at her watch and said she had to go. I handed her my phone and asked her to enter my contacts. She hesitated for just a second before taking my phone. Wow. You got her number. That's a big deal considering where she came from, Molly said as Rocky left the bar. I wouldn't hesitate, you know. Act while the iron is hot. I took Molly's advice and called Rocky the next day to ask her out. She agreed. Although I had been on a few dates since my divorce, I still didn't feel comfortable with the concept. I knew I was done with Tracy, but it still didn't feel right, dating another woman. I took our vows very seriously, even if she didn't, and it would take me longer to accept the obvious. However, I kissed her, twice, and she reciprocated. I've never done this before, even when I was a single guy. I couldn't explain it, but I definitely wanted to do it again. Over the next few weeks, we visited several ethnic restaurants, attended a rock concert, a Mozart concert, and a hockey game. She fit into my life just as well as she fit into my side when I had my arm around her. We were in no hurry to get into bed. In fact, it only happened around our 12th date. We returned to her house after watching the movie, and she made us each a cup of coffee with Bailey's infused. I settled down in the middle of her couch, and she sat sideways next to me with her legs crossed over my lap. I kept my hands on her slightly bent knees until I began to slowly massage up and down her thighs. We spent the whole day together, first at her house and then at mine. That evening, we had a nice dinner and then went to the Unicorn for a few drinks. In fact, Rocky insisted we go to the Unicorn because she wanted to talk to Molly. The bar was pretty busy when we arrived, so we both knew Molly wouldn't have much time to talk. But Rocky volunteered to go get some drinks and walk up to the bar while I grabbed a table. I saw Rocky lean across the bar towards Molly. Then they shared a quick hug before Rocky returned to the table with a couple margaritas on pineapple. "Pineapple margaritas, seriously?" I asked. "Oh yes," she replied. 6 months later, we were talking about moving in together when one day during sex I lost my head. We were having pretty intense sex when I slapped her ass hard with my right hand. As soon as the sound of the blow was heard, I realized that I had made a mistake. "This will never happen again," she shouted at me before she went into the bathroom and locked herself in there. I spent the next half hour trying to calm her down through the locked door. Spanking my woman's ass was something I did with Tracy and women before her, as a matter of course, but I had to keep her history in mind. Finally, I persuaded an angry and half-hysterical Rocky to leave the bathroom. I apologized left and right for the next 2 hours. "I lost my head, darling. It was the impulse of the moment. I will never raise my hand against you in anger. You know that," I pleaded. It took her a long time to calm down and accept my apology. "I'm sorry, Tal, but I will never allow myself to be a victim again. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but you can't do that again. Ever. Understood?" "Completely, darling," I said softly. Although Rocky didn't hold it against me, things were a little tense between us for a few weeks. Knowing her story, I didn't put any pressure on her, and little by little, we became close again. We were in the Barnes & Noble bookstore, walking through different sections, each looking for something to read, when I saw him approach her. He was tall and well-built, about 35 years old, very attractive and obviously very confident, walking up to Rocky, touching her forearm and starting a conversation. This was not a random approach, and I watched in horror from the other end of the row. Yes, Rocky and I were a couple, but we made no formal commitment to each other than our housing agreements. Was I witnessing the beginning of the end of our relationship? They only spoke for a few minutes. At one point, I saw her face turn red. He then handed Rocky his phone, hoping she would put in her number. I watched in horror as she gave him her best, dazzling smile. Then she hesitated and handed the phone back. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Suddenly, I felt sick to my stomach. I realized that I could not lose this woman. I slowly approached Rocky after her potential suitor left. "You don't look too good," she said, making the mommy gesture and placing the back of her hand on my forehead to check my temperature. "Oh, really, Mom?" I mocked. "I'm fine, actually." She hit me on the shoulder, putting some warmth into it. "Mom? Mom? Don't make me flip you over my knee, old man." The next day, I bought an engagement ring. Lydia was happy for us. She and Rocky built a good relationship. It took some time after Tracy's second betrayal for Lydia and I to get back on good terms. She pushed hard for a reconciliation with her mother after the first affair, and I think I took some of my frustration out on my daughter after the second betrayal. I also knew that she felt guilty that her mother was like this. By mutual agreement, Leeds and I spoke little about her mother. Last I knew, Tracy's lover was still in town and they were still having sex during and after the divorce. After finishing his second degree, however, he left town for jobs in several states, and Tracy apparently was not part of his future plans. According to Lydia, he told my ex-wife that she was great in bed, but he didn't even consider marrying her. 2 weeks after my engagement, Lydia became engaged to her boyfriend of 2 years. When she called us on FaceTime, she and Rocky made this girlish squeal in such a high pitch that I think only dogs can comfortably hear. They jumped around like 5-year-olds on sugar candy. Her fiancé and I just stayed in the background and smiled. It's much safer this way. Rocky and I were supposed to have a small, intimate wedding in about 2 months, but Lydia wanted everything to go all in and postponed the wedding for a year. She asked Rocky if she wanted to help, but warned that Tracy would be her main assistant as the mother of the bride. My kind fiancée said she understood and would be willing to help if needed. Although Tracy was alone at the rehearsal and dinner, she came to the wedding with a man who I assumed was about the same age as our daughter. My daughter was not happy with this development, and I saw them exchange harsh words before the ceremony. At least her date sat in the back of the church for the ceremony, rather than next to her in the parents' row like my Rocky. Chuck, Tracy's colleague, sat with us at the bride's family table at the reception. For the first half hour, he grinned at me as if he knew a secret that he could barely keep to himself. "It's okay, Chuck. We all understand that." Rocky smiled as sweetly as possible. "You are sleeping with Tal's ex-wife. How exciting this is for you. But if you keep grinning at Tal like that, I'll let him go and you'll get your ass kicked right here like a punk." "No problem, ma'am." "I didn't mean any harm," Chuck said in his most obsequious tone. "Oh, Tracy, are you really sleeping with this young man?" "Oh my God," her blushing mother said. Tracy sat quietly, looking at the tablecloth in front of her. I admit, I enjoyed her discomfort. The rest of the evening went much better. In addition to dancing with my daughter, I spent a good portion of the evening dancing with my wife. I also made sure to dance with my mother and ex-mother-in-law. I didn't even ask my ex-wife. In fact, I barely spoke to her during the evening. As the reception wound down, Tracy finally plucked up the courage to ask me to invite her to the dance floor. "We are the parents of the bride, Tal. We created this child. We can at least dance together," she said. "I've never hit a woman before, Tracy. You know it. But you came like this close. No dancing, not now, never. Rocky is an interior decorator and has to work late at times and a few hours on the weekends as part of her job. I accepted the occasional extra hours and never thought much about it. At least until 3 years later when the occasional extra hours became a regular occurrence. She gave me all the usual excuses that sounded legit when I first complained about it. One day around noon, I was in the area and decided to invite my wife to dinner. However, my attempt was thwarted when the office secretary, who didn't know who I was, told me that Rocky was out on call and would be out the rest of the day. I did not leave my name or number, telling the secretary that I would try to come back some other time. Rocky's absence wasn't unusual, but I found it odd that she didn't mention anything about being out of the office most of the day. This would be something we would normally share over dinner, but lately she seemed to be becoming more distant and communication became more infrequent. Rocky was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I walked in at 5:45 as usual. She came up to me and gave me a quick kiss and hug, and I could tell she had recently showered and changed from work clothes to casual ones. I have to admit that my first thought was, why is this happening to me again? After a few minutes of idle conversation over dinner, I told her about my visit to her office to invite her to lunch. She quickly looked down at her plate and I could see her gathering the strength to look me in the eye. I might not have noticed this movement if I had not been expecting it. "Oh yeah, I ran to the local KFC for a lunchbox. I wish I knew you were coming. I would have made you take me somewhere expensive," she replied wittily. Well played, I thought to myself, wondering how long she had been deceiving me. 2 days later, she called me in the afternoon and said that she would have to work a couple of extra hours in the evening. Under normal circumstances, I would go home and start cooking dinner. Now I drove to her store and grabbed a spot in the parking lot a few minutes before closing. At 5:02 p.m., she left the office, got into her car, and drove off. So much for working late. I tried to follow her at a safe distance, but I'm not a private detective. I got stuck in rush hour traffic and lost it. The next day, I called the same private investigator who had been following Tracy. 2 agonizing weeks later, I had the full report. We were in the middle of another mostly quiet dinner when I decided it was time. "Why, Rocky?" I asked quietly. She chalked mashed potatoes. "Because she needed help, Tal, and I knew you wouldn't let me do it if I asked," Rocky replied. "I understand that part, Rock, but why did you think it was okay to lie to me? You know how things worked out between her and me." She noticeably shrank. Apparently, she didn't really think about it. I, oh God, Tal, you were following me. You don't trust me. No, you can't turn this on me, Rocky. You betrayed my trust. You betrayed my trust. I never thought that you would do this to me. I put down my fork, stood up, and walked out the door. I heard Rocky sobbing as I left. I was sitting in one of my favorite bars with a glass of Coke in front of me when my father walked in, furious as he was when I crashed the family Ford at 16. "You are crazy?" My father snorted at me in rage. "This woman saved you. Hell, she's even trying to save your ex-wife." "I understand that part, Dad, and I know she's a damn wonderful woman, but she chose the absolute worst way to do it. If I can't trust her, I don't need her. I'm not going through that again." "You should talk to her instead of sitting here and getting drunk," he said, still seething with anger. I pushed my glass towards him. He looked at it, brought it to his face, and tried it. "Ugh, it's cola. You come to a bar and drink cola? I was always worried about you spending too much time with your mother when you were a kid." "You need to think, Dad, and not get drunk," I said. "I love this woman, but she seriously violated my trust, and the last time I gave a woman a second chance, it didn't end well for me." "You have a lot to be angry about, very angry, but it wasn't about cheating. That's a big difference. Think carefully before you do something stupid," he said, before he stood up and walked away. I returned home around midnight. Rocky was sitting, waiting for me. I could see traces of tears on her face. "I screwed up terribly, Tal. I'm terribly ashamed to even think that I could have hurt you like that. I just never tied up 2 plus 2 together. I was just worried about her and trying to help." "My mom and your mom helped too," she said in a hurry as I approached her. I wasn't sure how I felt at that moment. I sat down opposite her in the living room and let her talk. "I'm guessing that her boyfriend has been beating her up for the last few months, but she was too embarrassed to tell anyone. I absolutely understand that. It was me, completely. You're too shy to talk, partly because you're afraid it's something what you caused. In the end, she turned to her mother for help, and her mother turned to your mother. Your mother knew about my past, and she came to me. I made her promise not to tell you anything because I know how you feel about Tracy, but she needed help, Tal. My help. I should have done something differently, even though I had good intentions. You broke my trust, Rocky. I love you, but this must never happen again. I can't go through this again," I warned. "I know I made a terrible mistake, my love. It will never happen again. I promise," she said quietly. "So, now that I have a good reason to be angry, how about I visit Tracy's buddy and explain to him how things will be from now on?" I asked. "Would you do this for her?" Rocky asked in surprise. "A real man doesn't hit a woman, even if she deserves it, which in her case." Encouraged by Rocky, my mother, and her mother, Tracy filed a police report against her boyfriend, a 30-year-old former college football player. He ended up serving his sentence in prison. Tracy did therapy for several months. While I wasn't entirely happy with Rocky becoming friends with Tracy, it only got worse in later years, as Lydia and her husband had a son and then a daughter. The two women grew even closer over their grandchildren, who adored both Grandma Rocky and Grandma Tracy. Rocky didn't mind inviting Tracy over when the kids came to visit. "Do you understand that she is my ex-wife?" I said to Rocky one day, after everyone had gone home from a day at our house. "Yes, but she is not the same woman she was when she cheated on you, and it would be cruel not to let her enjoy her grandchildren," she replied. "You know you're much better than me, right?" I asked. "Yes, I know that," she replied lightly. I think Rocky just couldn't leave it like that. We decided to have a small party for Independence Day in a few years. Nothing serious, just Lydia and her family and a few friends, about 20 people in total. Of course, Tracy was at the party. She was the only unmarried woman. The only unmarried man at the party was my colleague, Reg Wickersham. Reg was technically my subordinate. We worked together for about 10 years. His wife died about 5 years ago. I didn't invite Reg. Rocky did it. Let's just say I was skeptical when I heard about it. "You didn't think I could put 2 and 2 together? Why do you women always feel like you have to help the poor males?" "You've been telling me how lonely Reg is these past few years. I think he and Tracy are good for each other. I keep telling you that she's changed. I promise I won't push Tal. Just let things play out. And try to be a little nicer to her. She's my friend. You don't have to be friends with her, but try to be a little less rude. She is, after all, the mother of your daughter and the grandmother of your grandchildren. I lowered my eyes. She was right. The party was fun. I watched from afar as Reg and Tracy seemed to get along well. At the end of the day, Reg asked me to talk alone. I grabbed a bottle of Woodford Reserve bourbon and 2 glasses and took him to our home office. I poured both of us 3 fingers. Over, Reg, I said. What's happened? Reg came to this country from Scotland about 20 years ago. Although his accent has softened, when he strains, he sounds entirely like Sean Connery. Now he was in such a state. I know it's weird, Tal, but can I ask what happened between you and Tracy? I mean, you never really talked about it, and while I don't want to dig into it, I'm trying to figure out if I should even get involved. You know, ask her out. I gave him the short version of our marriage and divorce. I then went ahead and told him that he should talk to my wife to maybe get a better idea of who Tracy is today. Yeah, maybe I should talk to Rocky. After all, it's kind of weird that your wife is so good friends with your ex-wife, he said. Would it be too weird for you if I started dating Tracy? He asked. Talk to Rocky. If you like what you hear, I'd be more than happy for you to start dating Tracy, I said. 2 days later, Rocky told me she would meet Reg for drinks to discuss Tracy. 18 months later, Rocky was matron of the wedding, and I was best man when Tracy and Reg married. Well, I had to do something to keep her away from my husband, Rocky joked as we discussed how this all happened. Lydia and her family were delighted with the marriage. Reggie's 2 children and their families were also welcome. Tracy was delighted to have 4 more grandchildren. It was quite a prominent event when our families got together, which usually happened at least once a month. Rocky and I celebrated our 25th anniversary the same way we had the previous 24, sitting at the bar of what used to be called the Unicorn. Molly and her husband, with a little help from a quiet investor, bought the place from the previous owners about 15 years ago, and for some reason renamed it Molly's. Well, to hell with him. It remained one of our favorite places, in addition to being the place where our lives got back on track. Thanks to a little help from a young barmaid who just couldn't help but intervene in the lives of 2 broken people. When the opportunity to buy the place came up, Molly and her husband, Jimbo, were a little short on money to get a loan. Rocky and I jumped at the chance to help. Yeah, that could work, I said, smiling at Molly and Jimbo. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.